on the note of safety, Rat, did you have any pushback as far as, because you're kind of the air boss of this, right? So did you have any pushback if you said no was no means no, or did you ever get like people from above saying no, you need to cooperate with these guys more?
I would say just the opposite. I mean, the people from Navy people from above, to your point, really, never entered into it other than my appealing to ComFit, to Admiral Cassidy, when we needed some relief in terms of rules of engagement. We needed to fly closer or do a head-on pass closer. I had to go into his office with a couple of models like Bio was showing and demonstrate exactly how we were going to control the maneuver to him. So we there was a little bit of that, but there was no pressure whatsoever from the Navy side to do more. There was a push from Tony Scott's side to adjust even in the midst of scenes at times. So just a couple of recollections. There was a site up in Fallon. Some of you, will remember it, with a kind of a mountain in front. We were flying into the mountain to get the lighting and camera angles and stuff right. And we had a couple of kind of unsavory passes around the mountain, and we knocked it off. And I insisted that we move the location, and we did. There were occasions there was an occasion when I was flying very close and low and very near the jet wash of an F-14, and Tony Scott, and we were on the ground flying over the cameraman over a white lake bed up in the Fallon region, and the cameraman and Tony Scott kept communicating that he wanted me lower and lower and closer between the tails of the F-14 until I said no. And I never got pushback once we said no. So no pressure from above. And, I think Paramount responded every time, we cut the cord and said, we're not going to do that.
Brad, I've got a story about that. My memory that first day is they wanted me to actually stick the nose of the F-5 between the tails of the F-14. And I gave it a college try a couple times and basically ended up full cross control and having to just pull up and rudder out. And I think we came back and said, no, we can't do that. I was amazed how much the F-14 interfered with the F-5. I just couldn't get it in there.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was referring to. That kind of, issue, if you get these airplanes too terribly close, and the lightweight airplane behind the heavyweight. So I experienced exactly the same thing.
Yeah, well, it was interesting.
Well, Secks, you were involved in the famous inverted scene, right? So was that not another similar issue?
I think there's more than one of us that actually did that. Rat, did you do one of those inverted scenes too?
I did, but to this point, if you remember the editing, there are several scenes, that are edited together to try to make that work.
Yeah.
So we actually had a Learjet segment where the F-14, began a roll to, for that particular scene, couldn't complete it, and but a little clip from it winds up in the movie. There was a 3-2-1 look up segment with myself, and I don't know if I think it was Bio.
Yeah, I remember doing that with you, Rat.
Yeah. Where we had, we were basically clear air mass, and you and I looked up, and the F-14 did the same thing, and then they doctored that.
Here, let me show you what I did. Just like that.
But Secks, there was also a scene where we actually did it. So, we were at much higher speed. It's a long range view. It may have been you, but we actually flew the F-14 inverted and put the F-5 close enough underneath it to be able to get that long range shot. So there were, a few things that we did, but at 250 knots, we weren't going to accomplish that. And And, nor, as any of us know, are we going to necessarily fly over top one another, at any close distance. So it was a series of filmed events.
Oregon, you've got a pretty iconic picture of you actually doing that with another F-5 while they're, that's the most Navy thing I've ever seen, by the way, is you with another jet goofing off while they're trying to get this done with an F-5. How did that work out?
Well, Rat, we get the storyboard. Rat would come in the brief and say, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. And, we're going to do this. We're going to send 3 planes out. One day I went out by myself and did some stuff. And at the time, obviously, we didn't have digital cameras. So I had a film camera, and Bio always took video, pics of everybody. He was kind of the resident cinematographer on the staff. And then, but I gave my camera to Horst this day because I knew it was going to be, Rat was going to do some work when on the back-to-back, but then the F-14 trying to invert over him. And then me, Wood, and Horst were going to, be kicked out. So I said, Horst, here's my camera, take some pictures. And at the time, I wanted to get a good back-to-back. Hollywood and I used to always love to fly inverted, as do other people, but I wanted to get a good back-to-back with the nose to nose and the tail to tail. And I gave my frickin' camera to the damn resident football player on the staff. I love you, brother. But Horst is back there. So I roll upside down over Wood, and we're like that. And they're trying to do the same thing down below. And Horst is taking the picture, and he sucked. He's back here. So,
Hey, Mover, can I cut in for a second? 37 years later, Oregon's still bitching about that moment. Sitting around a campfire at a hog hunt, he's still bitching. I hear about that every time we get together. Back to you, Oregon. Go ahead.
all right. Anyway, so
Love you, brother.
I love you too, man. We get the picture, and Horst, we've got the picture, and when I was in upside down inverted, I'm looking at him, Horst, you suck. Oh no, man, it looks great. Looks good. I'm gonna take, got the picture. When I get him back there, he is sucked. I'm up here, Wood's down here, instead of like this, and it's just a aspect angle that Horst is at. And not only that, but if this is the frame that we're in, let's see if I can get over here to do this right. We're up here in the corner. So I actually cropped it out and got a good picture out of it. But every opportunity I get, I give them crap for that, because it's like, never give your camera to a former football player.
Yeah, and actually the lesson is never let you and Horst fly that close to me while you're playing with a freaking camera.
As you used
That
to
is
say,
true.
you picked a bad day to stop sniffing glue.
Well,
Exactly.
so
Anyway.
Bio, you took a bunch of shots from the back seat. Did they ever think about putting somebody with an actual video camera? I mean, was that even possible with the cameras back then in F-5?
Oh yeah. I took my little, I took 35, I had a decent camera. I took 35 millimeter pictures, and I just, just for snapshots, just to have. And, they were kind of interesting. But I talked to some guys. Heater was one guy, and then Heater was an F-14 pilot who's also a famous photographer, and he was a Top Gun instructor before I got there. But they gave him a film camera and put him in the back of an F-14, and he filmed various a lot of footage that made it into the movie. And then they gave an Air Force cameraman a camera and put him in the back of an F-14, and he took some pictures up at Fallon that made it into the movie. But this is not about the movie. This is about the real world. And Rat, I think we'll remember this. The coolest time I took a video camera in an F-5 was when we had Victor Belenko, the former Foxbat pilot, come by and fly with us. And they were making a promotional movie of his new life in the United States. And so they sent up 2 F-5Fs. Vic was in one, and I was in with Rat. And then I was in the other one, and I think I was with Circus. And we went out and just flew 1v1, and I took pictures, and we got close so you could tell it was Vic flying in the airplane. But That's just kind of cool things that Top Gun instructors used to do now and then, you know.
Jaws, what was your impressions of the F-5 flying?
I wasn't up at Fallon, so I didn't get to see the overland stuff, but I just remember thinking all along, thank God we had, we're all sucking up to Rat today, right? The Diplo Rat. But thank goodness we had him there, kind of keeping control of this whole process, because I'm kind of with Bio at the beginning. It was like, this is a nuisance. Why are we doing this? And then going to the Rusty Pelican and looking at these guys and wondering why all these girls are coming up to him, because I have no idea who they are. A guy with a ponytail, you're going to play us, and then watching them. I think one of the most fascinating things for me was watching them make a movie on the ground, and it taught me that you can look at what somebody's doing and think they're a bunch of idiots, and then when you see the finished product, you realize how smart they are. And why would we ever do a classroom in a hangar in front of an airplane? That's just stupid, right? But if they had done it in a classroom, it wouldn't have had the same effect. So for me, the flying was less of the interesting part, and the process of making a film was the real education for me, for what it's worth. There's another good anecdote on the F-5, since this is the F-5 crew, right? They painted those airplanes black, and I don't know if you've talked about it, but it was rubber paint. And they swore up and down that, this rubber will peel off these airplanes just fine, and their original camouflage paint schemes will be there. Don't worry about it. And of course, it worked for all of our airplanes except one, I think, and they peel the rubber off and it takes the regular paint with it. And part of the contract was that they were going to repaint these airplanes if it messed up the paint job. So they beautifully repaint this airplane in its camouflage colors. And not long after the movie comes out, we go, we go to air shows, we got to have an F-5 painted black. so we took a perfectly good camouflage paint scheme and painted it black because we wanted to publicize, the fact that we had been in the movie. But that's just one of those little things that happen.
Do you guys remember that Paramount sent us when they were trying to decide on the insignia, if you will, on the movie Top Gun? And they sent us like 5 or 6 choices, and we all voted on it. And actually, the one they picked was the one we voted on. I don't know if that had any sway or not. But and the other thing was, at the time there was a discussion like, they're going to call the movie Top Gun, And I, for one, I think the others will agree, said, God, that's going to be a flop because nobody knows what the hell Top Gun is except us. And of course, once again, that's why they said it wasn't a documentary, and we're not movie makers, we're fighter pilots. So obviously it was a huge success. But I do remember that discussion about what they were going to call it and the Paramount logo that they were going to use for it. So anybody else or anything like that back then, 40 years ago, 35 years ago?
Well, I think, the thing that got me, and Rat can probably, expound on this a little bit more, was the expense they were willing to go to get just a few seconds of film. And, the scene where Maverick's in there and he's going to be told that he's coming back to be a Top Gun instructor. They literally used our actual lockers that we had in this little tiny cramped mezzanine locker. They couldn't get the cameras in there. So if I remember correctly, Rat, they spent like $50,000 to pull these lockers out, install them for an afternoon in like some locker room somewhere else, shoot the scene, and then move them all back because they wanted the authenticity of those particular kind of little NFL style lockers that we had. Yeah. I was blown away. They didn't have to do that, but they did.
Yeah. They didn't have that big a budget for this movie. And we had to account for all the expenses, and from the Navy standpoint, it was supposed to be a break even. But they worried about money, but they didn't. I mean, there was a time when when they needed to do something, whether it was rebuild a house so that they could shoot the scenes that they wanted to shoot, and then put it back together again, they spared no expense. So it was like it was fascinating to see the machine, the Paramount machine in play. And I thought, at the end of the day, they were pretty professional bunch to be able to make the moves that they made from scene to scene to scene and site to site to site, and accomplish all that they did, in 4 to 6 months. I mean, it was impressive.
Jaws, I'm glad you came up with that. For 40 freaking years, I've been wondering about this. watch the locker room scene, and Mover, you know, I alluded to this on our podcast, but I went in one morning and took the where our helmets wouldn't fit in our little locker that we had and moved it down. So in the locker room scene, I know it's our lockers because I can see my locker. You have a locker here, locker here, locker here, down. Mine's down at the bottom. And I'm sitting there, and the one thing I could never reconcile was, that doesn't look like our locker room. I know those are our lockers because I see mine, but that's not our locker room. The mirror, the alcove that, you know, you walk in, that mirror where the sinks were. And I wasn't sure because it's 40 plus years, but you just answered it for me, bro, because that wasn't our locker room. Those are our lockers, but not our locker room.
Well, you don't remember going up in the locker room and seeing all our flight gear hung it up on without our lockers being there?
Yeah, well, that was our lockers for sure.
I know in the Top Gun spaces where the lockers were, our flight gear was hanging up there, but the lockers were missing.
Yeah,
That's right.
I remember that.
Yeah, I didn't walk in at that time, but it was. I've been sitting there for years. You know, hell, I've only seen the movie a handful of times, but it was like every time I see it, I joke and tell my grandboys, that's Papa's locker right there, because I went in and spent a whole day doing that to it, and but that just did not look like our locker area. So thank you, Jaws, for.
Okay, I got a question, Mover, if I can ask a question. In the movie, there's just a couple of scenes where they've got a shot of a MiG-28 pilot. And I think they only put the cockpit camera in the F-5F, and I think it had to be either Rat or Secks flying that. But I've looked at that, and with the mask on, the visor down, I can't tell which one of you guys it is. Can you
It's
guys
all of
tell?
us.
Oh.
Yeah, the best answer is it's all of us. There were times, you know, whoever flew that airplane flipped that camera on and
All of
and
us.
kept flying.
I
And when
always
we were
thought that
done
was
flying
Secks.
that airplane, we shut it off.
So
And-
you mean
and
you
to that-
guys have been telling all your friends that was actually you?
Listen, to that point, you know, and Rat said it's all of us. If I had $1 for every time I came across somebody who said, well, you know, oh yeah, I was in the movie, or my uncle was in the movie, or my dad was the Top Gun. I remember being down in Mission Valley on a Friday happy hour, and I was meeting some young lady down there, and I happened to be in this crowded bar, and I'm not really eavesdropping, but sitting right in front of me is this surfer dude, and he's got the dregs, and he's sitting next to this really, really hot young lady, and I hear just, you know, blah 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 blah, Top Gun stunt pilot, blah blah blah, and I kind of like listen in, and next thing you know, he's selling us, and she gets up to go to the restroom, and I looked at him and I go, hey, I don't want to crash your party or anything. I just got to tell you. And I told him who I was. He goes, dude, I've been doing this every week. I can't miss. So everybody flew in that scene. Everybody's a Top Gun instructor. Everybody's a movie star. And let's face it,
I do
once
love
the
the
movie
people.
came out, if you went to the club, you could be an Army guy, a Navy guy, a Weeblo, a Cub Scout, a mailman. If you could point to a picture and say, that's an airplane, there was a good chance you were going to do okay in the club, because everybody was in that movie.
But you're the real Hollywood, right? I mean, so do you get royalties because they used your Hollywoodness?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I get
there are ripple
royalties.
effects of that to this day. And I think all of us chafe a little bit when we
Yes.
see somebody write a book, you know, like leadership lessons from Top Gun. And it's like, who is that dude?
Yeah, right.
or whatever.
Exactly.
And whatever.
Well,
Hey, Jaws.
yeah. To that point, Jaws, you know, one of the things in bio alluded to it very early on. We talk about the movie because that's sort of what the initial gist of this podcast is about. But it really was just sort of it was a moment in time for us, because when I think back about my experience there, and I was there for a pretty long time, I don't really recall that. I recall the day in, day out workload. I remember every day I walked in there, I felt like I got to bring my best game because I didn't really belong there. I flew with a lot of really amazing guys and worked alongside a lot of consummate professionals. And so that's the story of Top Gun to me.
Yeah. And Hollywood, I tell people that it was the best cultural experience I've had in my entire career, because you had the inmates running the asylum,
Yeah,
and
we
you
did.
had what I called positive peer pressure, where we all showed up with the best game we possibly could, and we weren't going to let each other down. And by the way, we also had a lot of fun together, but it was
Yeah.
positive peer pressure. The best example you'll ever find anywhere.
Well, that is a great segue. What was it? Let's talk about Top Gun during the 80s, the best time. What did you guys think as far as how it evolved during your time there?
Well, I'll start by telling you it was a very transformative time for fighter aviation. There are episodes where fighter aviation has been through these times, which goes all the way back to the genesis of Top Gun itself. But when all of us on this podcast were there was when the Russian threat was evolving very quickly. They were transitioning from only being able to shoot you in the rear quarter to being able to shoot you in the forward quarter to being able to shoot you in the forward quarter looking down. And we were having to evolve our tactics very, very quickly. At the same time, we were trying to teach great fighter pilots to be excellent, even better fighter pilots in the basics of that aviation. So it was a very transformative time for us. We were very fortunate at the time to have a very gifted Air Force exchange pilot come and work with us, Mike Strait, BOA, who brought a lot of what the Air Force was looking at on the forward quarter into what we did at Top Gun. And I think it was an incredibly important time for the school and for fighter aviation in the Navy and Marine Corps. Like
I said, and I'm not trying to sound like a homer, but I was there for 44 and a half months. I was there a long time. And I honestly mean that. Every day I'd walk in there, and I've talked to Steve Harden, Cowboy, and Jambo about this too. So I always used to walk in there going, today's the day they're going to realize I really don't belong here. Because everybody was going 100 miles a second. You'd walk in there, and I think I was listening to a little bit of the earlier podcast as I was driving back from the mountains earlier this afternoon, and I heard the guys talking about that, and it really was a nonstop job. I don't recall taking a lot of leave. In between classes on a Friday, you'd debrief, and then a couple guys might fly to El Toro and do a weekend double pump, flying against the fighters, fleet support. We'd wrap up a class, and half the staff would head probably to go somewhere to improve their lecture series or do some research. Some of the guys took off to go, do fleet support or go to Fallon or fly TARPS missions with the adversary squadron there, or I think it's BFA 126 now. But it was a very, very busy place. And if you walked in there and you didn't kind of jump in the whirlwind, you kind of felt like it was all going by because everybody was working their tails off. So the time flew by. You go from being, you walk in the door as a brand new guy and you're thinking, I am never going to be able to get up to this speed. And eventually it just sort of sucks you in, the vortex sucks you stick your face in the fan and in you go. And 45 months later, you come out the other end a completely changed person because you've never worked with a group of individuals like that and never have since. So,
Mover is a microcosm of this. The term murder board originated at Top Gun, and it's now a common business term that everybody knows. And just amidst all the professional flying and debriefing and research and all that, if you wanted to give just a 1-hour lecture to the class, you had to murder board it in front of all the other instructors, and you would give that lecture for an hour. And people the likes of Hollywood and Secks and Driscoll and Carrot Fulton would just rip you for 6 or 7 hours after that because they wanted it to be perfect, and you weren't going to let the staff down. You would die before you would fail a murder board, and that's the kind of work that Hollywood's referring to.
A lot of people don't realize how many hours this, like Jaws is alluding to put in to do a murder board. You research it, you practice it on your own. You usually give it to just about every instructor in Top Gun, just them, and they critique you. And then you have to do the actual murder board with the whole staff. And you're in your regular uniform. You get critiqued on how your uniform. They're sitting in flight suits. You're in your uniform. And it's hours and hours and hours of research, hours and hours of practice. And then you get the murder board. Then you have to take all the critiques from every instructor and go back in and add these things in there. I guess you guys remember the longest murder board we had was the one that Beef did on the Soviet pilot, the category system. It was like a 2.5-hour lecture. He went through the whole thing. We started the murder board around after lunch. It went all afternoon. We had to come back on Saturday to finish it up, just a critique of that murder board. So it's amazing the amount of work the instructors put in just to get our lecture. Then if you did a tactics lecture, it's even tougher. But you never got the tactics lectures till you've been there for a while. But the most important thing I like to say about being at Top Gun was, and I think everybody will admit this, in a regular fleet gun squadron, you always have a few pilots you don't take your eyes off of. You know, there's really good pilots, and there's some you're going to watch. At Top Gun, the Top Gun pilots, you never had to worry about going out and flying with a Top Gun instructor. You knew they were going to be where they needed to be. They weren't going to hit you. They were going to follow all the rules. So it really made flying fun. But it could also get kind of boring because you go out there on a 1v1 with another Top Gun instructor, and after 2 or 3 turns, you come on the radio and say, well, we know how this one's going to end. It's usually knocking it off because you're getting close to the hard deck. So you go back up and set another engagement up, and after 2 or 3 turns, you say, well, we know how this one's going to end. It's usually in a stalemate, unless you try to do something really unusual, where you can force them to lose sight, which usually most of the time didn't work, because then you had to get out of that one too. So, and you got so good at it that you could pass somebody, a fleet pilot, and you could tell him exactly within probably 5 or 10 knots what his airspeed was.
Yeah.
So, you know, flying ACM was a lot of fun, but sometimes, you know, flying against a Top Gun instructor, you get kind of boring because everything always ended in stalemate. So knock it off because either we're at the soft deck where everybody's still slow around 10,000 feet, or you're getting close to the hard deck where you just got to knock it off. So go back up, set it up again, and start over again. But the most important thing I got out of Top Gun was flying with a bunch of pilots that everybody was professional. You never had to worry about what they were going to be doing with the airplane. You didn't have to worry about them hitting you. It really made flying enjoyable.
These guys you're looking at here, man, I tell you what, the best. What a pleasure to fly with such professionals. I mean, you never had to worry about another Top Gun instructor. And if you wanted the best fight of your life, it was another Top Gun instructor. And we got to do that occasionally. We're so damn busy, but the beauty is we own the airplanes, and there were times when we, you know, hey, you want to go flying? Yeah. Call down to maintenance and hey, you have any airplanes available? And you go out and fight one another. And God, what great moments, what great time.
You know, Morgan, you talk about those 1v1s and we do, you know, 1 versus 1 versus 1s. We do all kinds of things with each other. And there were a lot of funny lines that came out of those experiences. And one of my favorite lines ever was Chick Winship talking to Brian Flannery. It's like, hey, Beef, is that a bug out? Yeah. Why don't you take this ATOL with you on the way out?
Yeah. Jaws, you just saved me. I was going to say that, Jaws. I remember that.
I remember Harpo. I'm sitting there and we're fighting, and I've got someone engaged. I'm like that, and I'm looking up. Harpo's on a perch, and I go, Harpo, why don't you come on down there and enjoy some of this fun? He goes, as soon as I light this other engine, I'll be right in there, man. You know, I mean, he was up there, had lost an engine, and was trying to relight it as he's trying to still prosecute the attack. I mean, classic Top Gun stories, man.
I got a short story about fun. When Jaws and Flex were leaving, they wanted to go out for one last flight. And Jaws, you can tell me if I'm telling this right. So on a Friday afternoon, they just jumped into an F-5F because Flex was a Rio. And they just jumped into an F-5F and went out over the warning area and just to do one last flight. And Horace, you might have been involved in this, but we were sitting in the training office. And as soon as they left the room, everybody in there goes, oh, we can't let this go. So everybody just shadowed them like 5 minutes behind them. And Pyro, well, maybe. And
my memory of that is Jaws was going out on his final flight to do a 1v1v1. And Pyro and I were the ones. We heard that, and we waited about 5 minutes, and we're just giggling like a couple of little kids. We're getting our flight gear on. We're waiting till they taxi out, and we sprint out to the F-5. We find him, and Jaws is holding his own in that fight. All of a sudden, it's 4 versus 1, and everybody's just chuckling in their plane. It was one of the best. And then Pyro and I went out and did a couple 1v1s and just had a blast. What a great hop.
That's a good kiss off.
Okay, can I want to say something professional that sometimes am able to remember. One thing that I thought was great about Top Gun was that the standards and the rules applied to everyone.
Yeah.
And people have talked about murder boards. I remember I gave a murder board that was a tactics lecture, and it was F-14 intercepts. I had a lot of help because it was a brand new lecture. It was very challenging for me. And then some instructors, and I'm not going to name who they are, but some guys who I, put up on a pedestal, they said, well, Bio, don't worry about it. They go, you'll get this right. And somebody who you think is a legend goes, well, I gave my murder board and I got a thumbs down. I had to redo it. And so there's nobody that walks in there and is, oh, you're good. You can do this. No, everybody has to meet the standards and perform at the same level. And then the other thing that I found was they will help you to perform at the required level as long as you put forth the effort.
Well, most of the guys that are there or that have been on the staff or on the staff, not most, I think every one of them, hold themselves to a higher standard. So, yeah, everybody else is saying, yeah, you're going to do well, this and that, but you are also doing the work that's necessary. I think that was God, what a great thing, man. I mean, I remember these AOMs where we would just beat the hell out of one another over an issue or whatever. But in the end, like Secks alluded to earlier, y'all come out preaching, what Top Gun, what we decided on, what we voted on. And it was just such a great culture overall. And it's because I think you walk in there and the standards were set for you from your predecessors, which is why we were worried so much about how the movie would come out. We didn't want the torch to go out. But everyone there held themselves to that standard as well. And that just made it work. So,
Horse, you were actually flying the F-16, right? Which is part of the advancement and moving on as an adversary.
Yeah, I was one of the first group that went through. It was, I tell you what, it was just a fantastic plane. You could do anything. It was extremely comfortable to fly. You could simulate any threat because you could pull power and simulate it. Basically we had the hottest engine in the world. The only thing we had were the bad flap schedule, but it was the hottest jet I've ever seen. I tell you, there's one story that stands out in my mind, and it tells you a lot about Top Gun. It was my third flight. It was a solo, and we're going through the advanced course, and it was an ACM hop. And the comm went something like this, 2, you're on fire. And then I call Fox 2, you're dead. And he goes, no, you're on fire. And it turns out they'd given me the wrong jet, and it was one that they were letting the engine go for many, many hours to see how long it could perform. And I actually had a afterburner fire, and apparently it was about 30, 40 feet of flames coming out the back of the jet. So pulled back to military power, got up to where I could safely, glide back to Luke Air Force Base. And Wiggs, our CO at the time, he was in the class 2, and he comes up on the other frequency. Horse, how you doing? What's going on? I go, I've got a problem with my engine. I had a fire. And he wasn't concerned at all. He basically says, well, don't suck, and I'll see you on the ground. I come in, and so I'm going to do the SFO, the simulated flame-out landing. And so I've only done one of these, and my whole thought process is I'm not sure the engine's going to work. Don't suck, in other words. And so I landed, I rolled out, and there were about 30 colonels and 3 generals waiting for me, each with their own truck at the end of the runway. And, so I just can't help but think back to Wiggs with, you got this, answers yes, goes, hey, I'll see you on the ground. So that kind of showed the difference between the Air Force and the Navy.
Well, the corollary to that, Horse,
Pleasure to fly. Go ahead.
when the corollary to that is when Boa, our Air Force pilot, through no fault of his own, lost the canopy on an F-5 during a flight. So he comes in and lands without his canopy, and Boa thought he was toast because he would have been toast in the Air Force. But we walk out and go, hey, Boa, you're a Top Gun instructor. We know you're a good pilot. You're a professional. I'm sure that everything was okay. Your next flight is tomorrow. and he just could not believe he thought it was over, and he was, no, you're a pro. Step it up, back on.
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool. Anybody else have anything, Rat?
I'd say, I've been looking for the same thing that we experienced at Top Gun for the rest of my life. And I think I'll continue to be looking for it. Maybe you get little snippets out of it in a command or two that you experienced, but there is nothing in life like this experience and this place that we're talking about today. And it's largely the quality of, those guys up and down those little squares on the right-hand side of this, and their brothers that are out there that came before us and have gone after us. But this is one of a kind. It's lasted, over 50 years, and it's excellence at its best. And I don't know, maybe it's the culture that's bottom up that made Top Gun what it was and made it sustainable. But it's something that once you experience it, you'll be chasing it for the rest of your life.
Well said, Rat.
Well said, yeah.
I hope that if some of the current Top Gun instructors get to see this, they understand that, because we, rode the coattails of people that came before us, and God, I tell you what, it was an awesome place to be. And moving once again, I'm getting ready to get shut off again, it looks like. But if, yeah, I know it's terrible internet. But two of our guys here, and I love all my brothers here. But two of these guys with us are 4-star admirals. Became the ultimate, the top of what we do in the military, in Rat and Jaws, and that's freaking incredible. When you
Oh, there he goes.
There he goes.
There you
Speechless.
He's making a good point, though. Those guys did well, and
Yeah.
it was a great place to be from.
I always say this because the rest of you got out and became airline pilots, because I never would have made it if you'd still been in the service. But,
Yeah, right. That's funny.
But one of the most fun times that we as pilots had is when we would go out with 2 F-5Fs with Rios in the back seat, and they would fight against each other. And that was like King Kong, reputational jeopardy. You had to dominate that fight if you were a Rio.
And at the same time, it was like a telethon.
Yeah, and Seckinger used to call it the pull like a mofo fight, because you'd start off at 400 knots, and next thing you knew, you're at 90 knots with people pulling as hard as they could on the stick and not knowing what to do. And the guys in the front seat are laughing as hard as they can. But
Bio?
it was good.
Any comebacks on that?
Oh yeah, I learned how easy it is to bleed energy.
anybody can do it.
Talk about an eye opener, Jaws. You're a Rio. I had 1,200 F-14 Rio hours, and I get out there in an F-5, and then in 3 moves in 45 seconds, I'm down to 100 knots. Going, what do I do now? So
At least you were at 5,000 feet. So
yeah. It was cool flying the F-5, good or not. That was like, so for Rio, that was awesome. Yeah.
My favorite airplane.
That's awesome.
Let me say one more thing about the F-5 training Rios. What they didn't know about was when we were doing formation flying, we'd bring it in real close and we'd give it to the Rio, and then we'd turn the pitch augmentation off and you give it to them, and then airplanes would go all over the place, and they'd move it back down. So, no, I got it. So we'd take the stick back, and we'd turn the pitch augmentation back on, move it back in close, and then turn it off as soon as it got it. So we did this like 2 or 4 days.
I can't believe you did that, Secks.
We did it.
Secret.
But Fletch Galpin was the best. So we played with him for like a week.
That is amazing. Oh, that's staying. I'm keeping that one. That's a good one. Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate everything. I really, really appreciate all the support. And Oregon, thanks for organizing this, because, again, I couldn't have done it without you. This is history in the making.
Hey, all these guys hey guys, always a pleasure to be in your presence. Every one of you.
Good seeing you guys.
Yeah.
All right.